So, hello and welcome everyone to today's Sutta class. As usual, we will start with the Namo Tassa. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome everyone to today's Sutta class. Today is the final session of our course on Buddhist conflict resolution strategies, and it's the time when finally the conflict or the schism at Kosambi gets resolved and all those monks reconcile and the schism is healed. So after studying this for 2 months, I think it's time that we come to the end of this conflict. And we finally see how this is being resolved or how the Buddha solved this issue. So if you remember last time or the last few times, we saw that the Buddha left those monks that were quarreling at Kosambi and he went into retreat in the Parilayaka forest, and he spent 3 months on retreat all by himself, only together with an elephant. And after that, he did not go back to Kosambi. After the retreat was over, he went to Savatthi and he actually spent time with other monastics and other lay people who were interested in practice and who actually wanted to listen to the Buddha and wanted to hear his Dhamma and practice his Dhamma. So he left those monks at Kosambi behind when he figured out, or when they repeatedly told him that they were not interested in his teaching and that they repeatedly told him to leave him alone. And then he went to Savatthi and did something else and was just waiting to see if those monks eventually would come to their senses and would come to see him. So that is the point where we left off last time with the Buddha in Savatthi. And that's where we are going to pick up the story today. And we will read again today from the Vinaya, from that chapter that deals with the conflict at Kosambi. We've read from that chapter quite a few times already. This is Khandaka 10 or Mahavaka 10. There is a link in the live chat. And we will be reading from paragraph 5.1.1 on Sutta Central. So if you use the link in the live chat, that should take you right there. And we are using Ajahn Brahmali's translation today, as usual. And we would just start at exactly the point where we left off last time, with the Buddha leaving Parilayaka, the forest, where he spent his retreat. So the text goes as follows. When the Buddha had stayed at Parilayaka for as long as he liked, he set out wandering towards Savatthi. When he eventually arrived, he stayed in the Jeta Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. So of course, you all know this monastery. This is a really big place with a lot of monastics and many lay people close by. So he is now staying again with a big sangha and of course now teaching people who actually want to be taught and no longer really wasting his time on the monks in Kosambi. So then the text continues. Soon, the lay followers in Kosambi considered, these venerable monks at Kosambi have caused us much misfortune. The Buddha himself left because he was troubled by them. Well then, let's not bow down, rise up, raise our joint palms, or do acts of respect for them. And let's not honor, respect, esteem, or associate with them, nor give them alms food. Because of this, they will either leave, disrobe, or reconcile with the Buddha. And that is what they did. So here we see now, after the Buddha has left, now it is the lay people here who are taking action. So the lay people obviously are also quite upset that the Buddha has left, so they can no longer see him, they can no longer listen to his teaching. So it's not just a loss for the monastics at Kosambi, but it's also a loss for the lay people. And the lay people are quite unhappy about the situation. And of course, now they no longer feel respect for those monks, because the monks are not practicing properly and the monks are quarreling the whole time. And they have quarreled to the point that the sangha was split, that a schism was caused, and that the Buddha has left. So obviously, the rest of the Buddhist community will feel quite upset about this. So the lay people feel that they have no longer any respect towards those monks. So they decide not to pay respect to them anymore. And especially they decide not to give them alms food anymore, so not to feed them anymore. And that is obviously a big problem, because monks and nuns who live by the Vinaya, they cannot cook their own food, they cannot prepare their own food, they cannot grow their own food, and they also are not allowed to store food overnight. So every single day, they depend on the lay people for the daily meals. So if the lay people stop giving alms food, then obviously that will become a very dire situation for them very quickly. And it's also remarkable how the lay people all come together here, and how the lay people are actually able to act together as one united group. So in the beginning, when we read the first few texts about the conflict, we saw that it was actually quite a small conflict. It started about the right method of cleaning a bathroom. And eventually that grew into such a big conflict that the entire monks' sangha at Kosambi got involved, and everybody was taking sides. And when it had grown that big, even the nuns' sangha got involved and they took sides. And then the lay people got involved and they were all discussing it and they took sides. And it says even people who weren't Buddhist had opinions on this and took sides. So it spread to everyone. So the text in the beginning told us that even the lay people were all divided and were all taking sides. But at this point, when the Buddha has left and when they all realize how bad the situation has become, it is the lay people actually who are able to come together again and to realize that, this is really bad, and that the Buddha has left, and that the situation is really, really dramatic. And so even though before they all took sides and they all quarreled with each other, now at this point they can all come together and they can all act together and put this kind of pressure on the monks to, as they say, either leave the place or disrobe or reconcile with the Buddha. So obviously, I think they're not hoping for the monks to actually disrobe. They're obviously hoping for them to reconcile with the Buddha. But anything is better than having the schism continue. So it is the lay people here that are taking action. And then the text continues. Soon, the monks at Kosambi said, "Well then, let's go to Savatthi and resolve this legal issue in the presence of the Buddha." So as soon as they didn't get enough food and as soon as they were hungry for a few days, they realized that, the right method of cleaning a bathroom is, after all, not that important. It's much more important to get some food and to survive and to actually, practice the Dhamma and get enlightened and stop quarreling about these really tiny, tiny issues. So at this point, finally, when the lay people are putting pressure on the monks, they are able to sort of let go of their very, very entrenched views that they were not able to let go before. And they see that really this is stupid to fight about this. And they all decide to go to Savatthi together to resolve the issue. So at this point, they're not reconciled yet. But at least they have come to their senses enough that they see that they need to do something. And they all decide to go to Savatthi together to ask the Buddha for advice. So then the monks at Kosambi put their dwellings in order, took their bowls and robes, and went to Savatthi. When the Venerable Sariputta heard that they were coming, he went to the Buddha, bowed, sat down, and told him, adding, "Venerable Sir, how should I act towards these monks?" So here now, the Sangha at Savatthi obviously hears that those Kosambi monks are coming. And the Sangha at Savatthi obviously must have heard before that there is this big conflict and the schism has happened, because a schism in the Sangha is a very, very dramatic situation. So it's very likely that the Sangha at Savatthi would have been informed about this. And so, of course, Sariputta, as one of the leaders of the Sangha there, Now hears that those monks are coming, and of course he wants to know how to deal with that situation, because as we have seen before, in Kosambi the conflict grew so big that eventually every single monk in Kosambi had to take sides and took part in that schism. So obviously now that they're coming to Savatthi, they want the Sangha at Savatthi wants to prevent that schism or that conflict from spreading into their own Sangha. So they don't want to be forced themselves to take sides and become part of that schismatic group or somehow become involved in that conflict. So now Sariputta is asking for advice how to deal with those monks when they arrive. And I think that's also very important, not only obviously for this conflict, but for any kind of conflict. If there is a conflict going on in our lives, maybe we don't want to really be involved in that, or so far we've been able to avoid taking sides. But eventually they're approaching us to help them resolve the issue, or they just come into our space and we can't avoid those people who are quarreling all the time being in our space. So it's kind of important to know how to deal with that without ourselves getting involved in the conflict and becoming a party in that fighting. And that's what Sariputta is asking about here. So, Venerable Sir, how should I act towards these monks? And the Buddha says, take your stand in accordance with the teaching. So take your stand in accordance with the Dhamma. And Sariputta asks, and how do I know what accords with and what is contrary to the teaching? And the Buddha says, there are 18 bases for knowing that someone is speaking contrary to the teaching. So there are 18 ways how you can speak contrary to the Dhamma. And the Buddha now explains the 18 ways, and he says, a monk proclaims what is contrary to the teaching as the teaching, and what is the teaching as contrary to the teaching. And he proclaims what is contrary to the monastic law as the monastic law, and what is the monastic law as contrary to the monastic law. So these are the first four. So basically, if somebody claims that something is in line with Dhamma when it is actually against the Dhamma, or if somebody claims that something is against the Dhamma when it is actually in line with the Dhamma. So twisting the Dhamma, distorting it, and basically teaching it upside down, or teaching the opposite of what is actually Dhamma, and what is teaching the opposite of what is actually Vinaya. So monastic law means the Vinaya. These are the first four, and then it continues in a very similar way. He proclaims what has not been spoken by the Buddha as spoken by the Buddha, and what has been spoken by the Buddha as not spoken by the Buddha. He proclaims what was not practiced by the Buddha as practiced by the Buddha, and what was practiced by the Buddha as not practiced by the Buddha. He proclaims what was not laid down by the Buddha as laid down by the Buddha, and what was laid down by the Buddha as not laid down by the Buddha. So again, he's twisting the Dharma. He, she, they, doesn't matter. They twist the Dharma. They teach the opposite of what is actually Dhamma, or saying that the Buddha taught something when he actually didn't, or that the Buddha acted in a way or practiced in a way when he actually did exactly the opposite. So these kind of distortions of the Dhamma. And then the Buddha continues. He proclaims a non-offense as an offense, and an offense as a non-offense. He proclaims a light offense as heavy, and a heavy offense as light. He proclaims a curable offense as incurable, and an incurable offense as curable. He proclaims a grave offense as minor, and a minor offense as grave. So this last group is about the Vinaya. So this is maybe not that applicable to lay people. But again, it's like distorting and twisting the Vinaya around and teaching the opposite of what the Buddha actually taught. So proclaiming that something is not an offense when it actually is, or the opposite, saying that something that actually is an offense is not an offense. Or claiming that an offense that is actually very, very minor, claiming that would be quite serious, or that an offense that is actually serious would be minor. and then a curable offense and an incurable offense. So that's maybe a little bit not immediately understandable. That just means that offenses come in different classes, the heavy ones and lighter ones. And most offenses are curable. That means there's a procedure. If you've broken that rule, there's a procedure you go through and to clear the offense. And depending on how serious the offense is, the procedure could be very elaborate and could take a few weeks to clear, or it could be very minor and the procedure is very easy and you just tell somebody and that already clears the offense. So there are different procedures, and most offenses are curable. That means you can clear them, but there are a few offenses that you cannot cure. So there are a few offenses, if you break those rules, you lose your status as a monastic immediately, and you cannot reordain at all anymore in this life. So those offenses we call the parajika offenses. Those are the most serious, most heavy kind of offenses, and those are incurable. And of course, if somebody breaks one of those parajikas, let's say they kill a human being or something like that, and then means they immediately are no longer a monk or a nun, but you pretend that this is actually a curable offense and that it's quite minor and it's not very serious, then of course that is a total distortion of the Dharma, and you keep somebody in the Sangha who should actually have left the Sangha and who is actually no longer a monk or nun and is pretending to be a monk or nun. And obviously that is very, very serious bad karma. So these kinds of twists is obviously contrary to the Dhamma. So these are the 18 bases for knowing what is contrary to the teaching. And then the Buddha says there are also 18 bases for knowing that somebody is speaking in accordance with the teaching. So this is exactly the opposite. Somebody proclaims what was taught as Dhamma, as actually being Dhamma, and what is contrary to the Dhamma as actually being contrary to the Dhamma, and so on. With the Vinaya, with all the rules and practices and so on. So it's exactly the opposite to the list that we have read just now. And what is interesting here, or what is the most important thing here, is that obviously in order for you to actually be able to judge whether somebody is speaking in line with the Dhamma and whether somebody is speaking in line with the Vinaya or contrary to that, you yourself have to have a very, very good knowledge of Dhamma and Vinaya to be able to make that call and to be able to make that judgment. So ultimately it is up to everybody, every single practitioner, to get a very, very good foundation, very good grounding in Dhamma and Vinaya, especially in the sutta texts, and for the monastics also in the Vinaya. For lay people, studying Vinaya isn't that important, but for the monastics certainly it is. So that you can actually make that call, and you can actually, when you listen to somebody, you can actually judge, is that in line with the Buddha's teaching or is that contrary to the teaching? So it is up to every single person to make that call for yourself. And the Buddha really expects every single practitioner to study that deeply and to be able to make that judgment, so that you can decide who to listen to and who not to listen to. And of course, if you're just starting out on the path, you probably not have that knowledge yet. So you need to rely on a teacher or a trustworthy spiritual friend. But you should really strive to become independent as soon as possible and to get a really broad knowledge in the Dhamma and in the suttas especially, so that eventually you're no longer dependent on that teacher or on that spiritual friend, and you can make those judgments for yourself. Because if you're dependent on other people, of course you can put your trust in those other people, but people can change, or maybe those people weren't good practitioners in the first place, or they lose interest in the practice or whatever. So here the Buddha really tells everybody that you're expected to take responsibility for yourself and take responsibility for your own practice, so that you're able to make those judgments. And then the text continues with all the other senior monks coming to the Buddha, asking the same questions, and the Buddha giving them the same answers. So there's a whole list of monks here who come to see the Buddha: Mahamoggallana, Mahakassapa, Mahakachana, Mahakotita, Mahakapina, Mahachunda, Anuruddha, Revata, Upali, Ananda, and Rahula. And they all went to the Buddha and told him that the Kosambi monks are coming. and they all get the same answer. And the Buddha encourages all of them to make their own judgment. So that he doesn't tell them just follow Sariputta, whatever Sariputta decides that you have to follow. No, he tells every single one of the senior monks that they themselves need to make that judgment for themselves. And after that, Mahapajapati is now coming. So now the bhikkhunis have heard about the Kosambi monks coming. And of course, the bhikkhunis also want to know what to do. So the bhikkhunis are not directly involved in this schism. This is a schism of the monks' sangha. So the monks' sangha is split, but the nuns' sangha at this point is not split. The nuns' sangha is still unified. But of course, the nuns' sangha is worried about this. They don't want to be involved in this conflict. And of course, they can't totally avoid seeing the monks. From time to time, they come in contact with each other and they see each other. And sometimes they might have questions towards the monks or get teachings from the monks or something. So they have contact with the monks. And Mahapajapati wants to just be careful not to get involved in this conflict. And she wants to know how to deal with this situation. So now Mahapajapati goes to the Buddha and tells him that the monks are coming, and she also asks, Venerable Sir, how should I act towards these monks? And he also tells her, well, Gotami, listen to the teaching from both sides, then approve of the views, beliefs, and persuasion of those who speak in accordance with the teaching. And whatever support the Sangha of nuns expects from the Sangha of monks, they should get all of it from those who speak in accordance with the teaching. So again, he's telling, Mahapajapati is telling the bhikkhunis that, again, they should listen to both sides and then make their own judgment, approve of the views, beliefs, and persuasion of those who speak in accordance with the teaching. So again, it's up to the nuns to know what is in accordance with the Dhamma and what is not in accordance with the Dhamma, and they themselves make the judgment who is speaking in accordance with the Dhamma and who to associate with, and not to associate with those who speak contrary to the Dhamma. And if they have any contact with the monks, if they have any questions or want to get any teaching or anything, then they need to get that from those who speak in accordance with the teaching, in accordance with the Dhamma. So it is up to the nuns also to decide who is in accordance with the Dhamma and who isn't. So again, there isn't a higher power. They don't have to listen to Sariputta. There's nobody who's like making that decision for them. It's again up to them to have a strong foundation in the Dhamma and to make that call themselves. And then now the lay people hear about this. And of course, the lay people are also worried, and the lay people also don't want to get involved in that conflict. And they also probably don't want to associate with bad monks who have caused a schism, and they're kind of wary, and they're kind of suspicious maybe a little bit, and they don't really know how to deal with the situation. So now Anathapindika and Visakha Migaramata. So those two are the leaders of the male and female lay communities in Savatthi. They also hear about this, and both of them also come to the Buddha. And they ask him the same question. Venerable Sir, how should we act towards these monks? And the Buddha answers, well, householders make offerings to both sides and listen to their teachings, then approve of the views, beliefs, and persuasion of those who speak in accordance with the teaching. So here to the lay people, the Buddha says that they should make offerings to both sides. So when it comes to material things, of course, the Sangha is very dependent on the lay people, especially, as we have seen already, dependent on the alms food, the food to survive from day to day, and maybe some other requisites that are needed. So when it comes to material things, the lay people shouldn't discriminate between those monks, because obviously all of those monks need to survive. And if they don't get food, they're not going to survive. So you shouldn't threaten the survival of a person. So when it comes to material things, everybody should be supported equally. That is what the Buddha says here. But and you should listen equally to everybody. But then again, it is up to each and every person to approve of those people who speak in accordance with the teaching. So also the lay people, the Buddha also expects that they have a good grounding in the Dharma, and that they can make that judgment, and that they will then listen only to teachings from the good monks. So again, to recap, in terms of material things, they should support all the monks, but in terms of Dhamma teachings, they should listen only to those who speak in accordance with the Dhamma. And then eventually those monks from Kosambi arrived at Savatthi. Venerable Sariputta went to the Buddha, bowed, sat down, and told him, adding, how should we prepare dwellings for these monks? Give them dwellings in a separate place. But what should we do if there are no dwellings in a separate place? Separate the dwellings and then give them out. Under no circumstances, Sariputta, should a dwelling be reserved for a more senior monk. If you do, you commit an offense of wrong conduct. And what should we do regarding food and requisites? Food and requisites should be shared out equally to everyone. So now the monks from Kosambi have arrived in Savatthi, and Sariputta now asks how should the arrangements be made for them, for the dwellings, for the food, for the material requisites. So obviously when Sangha members come to another place, normally there are some Vinaya guidelines or rules that are in place, how we treat guests as monastics. So usually we will be we show a lot of hospitality towards them, and we make sure they have accommodation and they have everything that they need, and so on, that they have all the information that they might need, and we greet them and we just make sure that they're okay from the travel, and that they have everything that they need. But of course, now in this case, it's more difficult because all these are schismatic monks, and if you are schismatic, then you don't actually belong to the same sangha. You're basically a separate sangha. So normally, if you are schismatic, then monks should not associate with you, and the monks that are not schismatic should kind of keep away from you. Otherwise, they are breaking Vinaya. And of course, Sariputta also thinks that, like, if the monks from Savatthi don't want to get too close, because otherwise they will get involved in that conflict also. So it's not like Sariputta isn't quite clear how those Vinaya rules about hospitality and so on should be applied in the case of a schism. And especially with regarding to dwellings, usually they need to stay in a separate dwelling, because like the monks that are not schismatic cannot stay in the same house or the same dwelling with them. And for that reason, the Buddha says, well, give them dwellings in a separate place. But these are so many. This is the entire Sangha from Kosambi that is coming. This is huge. So Sariputta says, well, probably we don't have enough dwellings in a separate place. And then the Buddha says, well, separate the dwellings. So what is happening here? First of all, the Buddha suggests that every Sangha gets a completely separate area. So those two groups from Kosambi get separate areas from each other. And also they are separated from the Sangha that is already at Savatthi. But this is huge, and then Sariputta says, we have no dwellings in separate areas, not for that many people. And then the Buddha says, well, you can give them the dwellings that are kind of together in the same area, but don't mix and match people within the same dwelling. And that obviously, on the one hand, keeps the Vinaya rule about sort of staying a little bit away from schismatic monks, but also it obviously prevents the conflict from spreading further. Because if you keep some kind of physical distance between those parties that are fighting, then there's less occasion for them to meet, and there's less occasion for them to kind of fan the flames and just, make the fighting bigger and bigger, and just, annoy each other the whole time. So Buddha is kind of physically keeping them separate as long as the conflict hasn't been resolved yet. And again, I think this is also something that is very practical, very applicable, not only to this conflict, but to many other conflicts. So if people are maybe coming to someone and asking for that person to be a mediator to help resolve that conflict, as long as the conflict hasn't been resolved, it's very good to keep those people a little bit separate, and not to put them all together in one kind of accommodation where they have to see each other all the time. And sometimes there's an opinion. Some people have the opinion it's good to put them all together, because then they would just rub against each other, and then all the defilements come up, and so all the defilements can burn up, and eventually everything will be smoothed out. But that is a very, very risky method, because that can work, but often it doesn't, and often it just makes things worse. So the Buddha here doesn't use that kind of quite aggressive method. He doesn't want the defilements to get bigger and to rub against each other. He just wants to keep people separate and to let them calm down a little bit. And then there is here this sort of what is printed in bold about not reserving dwellings for a more senior monk. So this is a little bit of a controversial thing. There are many different translations of this particular passage with the senior monk. It's not quite clear what it means. Some people say it means exactly the opposite of what is translated here, so that you cannot withhold a dwelling for a more senior monk from a more senior monk, instead of here reserving it for a more senior monk. So this is some kind of Vinaya issue that is being debated, but it's not important for what we are discussing today. So I just want to skip over this part in bold and move on, because it doesn't have anything to do with the conflict at Kosambi. So let's just ignore that for the time being and move on to the question about food and requisites. So Sariputta asks, what should we do with food and requisites? And the Buddha says food and requisites should be shared out equally to everyone. So again, when it comes to material things, whether those material things are provided by the lay people or is something that the sangha already has and is sharing among the members, you should give that equally to everyone, because in terms of material things, everybody just needs to survive. And at that time, I mean, material requisites were quite simple and were really just the basics that you need for survival. So obviously everybody's going to need them. And people are the same, and physical bodies are pretty much the same. So everybody needs the same kind of requisites. And those shouldn't be shared out in accordance with how good people speak on Dharma or whatever. It's just given out like according to need, and everybody needs food and everybody needs requisites. So we shouldn't make a difference here. Just treat everybody equally, because everybody needs to have the same kind of things. So and now finally, one of the monks that are quarreling is having an epiphany, and we will see what happens next. Then that ejected monk reflected on the teaching and the monastic law, and he concluded, "This is an offense, and I have committed it. I've been ejected since the legal procedure was legitimate, irreversible, and fit to stand." So now here, the ejected monk, if you remember from way back, the ejected monk is a sutra expert. So the whole conflict started with a sutra expert and a Vinaya expert quarreling about cleaning the bathroom. And the Vinaya expert claimed that the sutra expert had broken a minor Vinaya rule because he didn't clean the bathroom properly. And the sutra expert claimed that it wasn't an offense. But now, finally, after so many months of quarreling, that monk, who in the meantime had been ejected from the sangha by the Vinaya expert and his group, that ejected monk, so the sutta expert, finally comes to his senses, and he comes to see reason, and he concludes that he has actually committed this offense. And because he has actually committed that offense, it was legitimate to exclude him or expel him or eject him from the sangha. So the whole time he claimed that the ejection was illegitimate because he had not committed an offense. He was a pure monk. and an innocent monk, so you cannot eject an innocent monk, obviously. But now that he concludes that he has actually broken the rule, it was legitimate to eject him from the sangha. So he concludes that he is the one who made a mistake, and now he's willing to make amends for that. So now he went to those who were siding with him. So he went to his own students, the followers of him, of the sutta expert himself. So he went to his students, to the people who were siding with him, and he told them what he had been thinking. So now he's admitting his mistake to his own students. And I think that probably wasn't easy for him, because he is this really highly respected teacher and senior monk, and he has a lot of students, so probably he had some kind of ego involved in this. And he had been fighting for so many months and claiming that he was pure and innocent, and now suddenly he has to admit a mistake. So probably that wasn't easy. But at least, finally he admitted that he had been wrong, and he's trying to make amends for that. And so then he adds, Venerables, please readmit me. So he's asking for the ejection procedure to be lifted and to be readmitted into the sangha. And they then took that monk to the Buddha, bowed, sat down, and told him what had happened, adding, Sir, what should we do now? And the Buddha says, this is an offense, monks, and this monk has committed it. He's been ejected since the legal procedure was legitimate, irreversible, and fit to stand. But since he recognizes this, he should be readmitted. So the Buddha confirms that it was an offense and that the ejection was legitimate. But also the Buddha says, well, now that he sees that he has made the mistake, he recognizes this, then just readmit him into the sangha. So there is no further punishment or anything. Once you admit your mistake, once you're willing to make amends, once you're willing to clear that offense, there's no further punishment. You're just readmitted into the sangha. So the procedure is quite simple. So as long as you can, overcome your own pride, and you can overcome your own ego and admit that you made the mistake, then you will be welcomed back into the sangha. There's no punishment. You will not be excluded forever or anything. If you're willing to admit the mistake, if you're willing to grow personally, then obviously the sangha should be very happy to let you back in. And this is what the Buddha says here. And so that ejection procedure is lifted, and the monk is led back into the sangha. But the schism is still there, because the Vinaya group and the Sutta group are still quarreling with each other. So far, it's only within the Sutta group that these issues have been resolved. So soon afterwards, the monks who were siding with the ejected monk readmitted him. They then went to the monks who had ejected him. So now the Sutta group is going to the Vinaya group. And they said, because this monk has recognized that he had committed an offense, and because he's been ejected and now readmitted, the basis for the arguments and disputes in the sangha, for the schism, fracture, and separation in the sangha have been removed. To resolve this matter, let's create unity in the sangha. So the Sutta monks are now going to the Vinaya monks, and they're telling him, our master, our Sutta expert has recognized his mistake. He has made amends. We have readmitted him into the sangha. So there's no further reason for us to quarrel and fight, and there's no reason for us to continue this schism. So why don't we all come together and create unity and harmony in the sangha? And why don't we all try to overcome this schism now? Because the cause for the schism has been removed. So now the Sutta monks, they all admit that they were wrong, that their master, their expert, their leader was wrong, and now they are asking the Vinaya monks to come together again and to create unity in the sangha. So then the monks who had done the ejecting went to the Buddha, bowed, sat down, and told him what had happened. So the monks who had done the ejecting are the Vinaya monks, so the other group. And now they are going to the Buddha and told him what had happened. And they added, how should we proceed with this? And the Buddha says, since this is the case, you should create unity in the sangha so as to resolve this matter. And it should be done like this. Everybody should gather in one place, including those who are sick. No one should give their consent. then a competent and capable monk should then inform the sangha. And then there is a whole procedure, a whole ceremony that the sangha can carry out to overcome a schism and to create unity. But first of all, the Buddha says that everybody needs to come together. So the whole Vinaya group needs to come and the whole Sutta group needs to come. Every single monk who was involved in this schism needs to assemble now in one place. And the Buddha says, including those who are sick. So usually when the Sangha carries out a ceremony or a formal act, a so-called Sangha if you are sick, you don't really need to come, or if you have something that is very, very urgent that you need to do, you don't really need to come. But what you have to do is that you have to send what is called consent. So if you are unable to come to a meeting of the Sangha, you go to another monk or another nun, if this is the Bhikkhuni Sangha, and you tell them, that other monastic, that you're unable to attend the meeting, and you ask that other monastic to tell the Sangha that you're not able to come, and that you give what is called chanda in Pali, or consent in English. So that means that you consent to whatever the decision the Sangha makes in that meeting. So you have, once the Sangha has made a decision, that decision is binding for every member of the Sangha that lives in that place. And it's not going to be debated again, and it's not going to be reversed again. So everybody has to submit to that decision once it's made. So if you don't go to that meeting, you obviously can't give your own input, and you obviously also can't veto the procedure. So if you don't go, you just consent to whatever the other Sangha members decide. And you can't complain and criticize it afterwards. You have to follow that decision. And that's why it's called consent. You just consent to whatever the Sangha decides. So, and usually if you're sick or if you can't come, then you can send consent through another monk or nun. But here in this case, the Buddha says, this is so important that nobody's allowed to not be present. Even if you're sick, even if you have something urgent to do, still you have to come, because this is more important. Nobody's allowed to send consent through another person. So that's what is meant by no one should give their consent. So every single person has to personally attend the meeting. And I think that is very important, because as we will see, because in that ceremony, obviously the ceremony is also there for everybody to feel like they're coming together as a group again, and it's there to clear the air, for people to let go of all any resentment that is still there after many months of fighting every single day. Obviously, there would be a lot of resentment and ill will towards each other. So this ceremony also is there for people to start fresh and to have a positive experience together, and to really do something together in harmony, to clear the air and to create a positive atmosphere, and for people to move on in the future like on a positive note. So if somebody misses out that meeting, it would be very hard for them to let go of that resentment that they might still have, because they haven't been part of that, fresh start and of that ceremony. So for that reason, also, I think it's very important. I think for that reason, the Buddha made it mandatory for everybody to come and attend. And then there's a competent and capable monk who should inform the Sangha as follows. So after everybody has gathered, they're now carrying out a ceremony to heal that schism and to bring the Sangha together again into as one, so to create the harmony in the Sangha. And this follows the usual formula that formal acts in the Sangha follow. So this is a standard pattern that we use for many, many different kinds of Sangha acts. And usually it starts as follows. Please, venerables, I ask the Sangha to listen. And then, because this monk has recognized that he had committed an offense, and because he's been ejected and now readmitted, the basis for the arguments and disputes in the Sangha for the schism, fracture, and separation in the Sangha has been removed. If it seems appropriate to the Sangha, let us create unity in the Sangha. So as to resolve this matter, this is the motion. So when there is a formal act in the Sangha, it always starts with a so-called motion. So somebody, a capable monk or nun, announces to the Sangha what they are about to do, so that everybody is clear about the decision that is being made now. So if anybody wants to discuss anything more or has any more input, then now it is clear what is being debated or discussed. So nobody's surprised afterwards and says, well, I didn't really know what we were doing or something, and complains and criticizes. So after you've been informed, there's no more opportunity for you to complain and criticize. And then that same person says, please, venerables, I ask the Sangha to listen, because this monk has recognized that he had committed an offense, and because he's been ejected and now readmitted, the basis for the arguments and disputes in the Sangha for the schism, fracture, and separation in the Sangha have been removed. The Sangha is creating unity in the Sangha so as to resolve this matter. Any monk who approves of creating unity in the Sangha so as to resolve this matter should remain silent. Any monk who does not approve should speak up. So this is how decisions are made in the Sangha. If you agree with the proposal or with this motion, then you just remain silent. And only if you disagree should you speak up. And this obviously is an easy way of decision making, because then there's not much, if everybody kind of agrees, then there isn't much debate and there's not much talking or not much back and forth about these small, tiny things. If you agree, you just keep silent. If you disagree, then you need to speak up. And then normally there's a small break here to see if anybody wants to speak up. Hopefully in this case, or obviously in this case, nobody spoke up because everybody wanted to create that unity in the Sangha. And then it is announced to the Sangha has created unity in the Sangha. So as to resolve this matter, the schism in the Sangha has come to an end. The fracture in the Sangha has come to an end. The separation in the Sangha has come to an end. The Sangha approves and is therefore silent. I will remember it thus. So this is the ceremony that they went through to create unity again in the Sangha. And then the Buddha gave the following instruction as well. The observance day procedure, the recitation of the monastic code, should be done straight away. So the observance day procedure is the procedure for the Opposita day. Opposita day is here translated as observance day. And recitation of the monastic code is obviously the recitation of what is called the Patimokkha, which monastics do on the Opposita day. And that should be done straight away. So usually Opposita days are on the full moon and on the new moon days, so twice a month. And only on those days do we recite the monastic code, the Patimokkha. And it is actually not allowed to recite the Patimokkha on any other day. So you can only recite Patimokkha on the full moon and the new moon day. The only exception to that is if there was a schism in the Sangha and you want to create harmony again, then you recite Patimokkha on that harmony day. And that doesn't have to be a moon day. That can be any day. Just the day that you have created harmony after a schism is a day when you recite the monastic code. And this recitation of the monastic code is called the harmony Opposita. So there is a full moon Opposita, there is a new moon Opposita, and there is a harmony Opposita if there was a schism in the Sangha. And the reason why we recite Patimokkha together to create harmony is because when a schism occurs in the Sangha, the definition of a schism is that two groups of monks recite Patimokkha separately in the same area. So usually everybody would come together and recite Patimokkha together. But if they do it separately, that is the definition of a schism in the Sangha. And so if you want to heal that schism, you need to all come together and recite Patimokkha together again. And obviously, if you want to heal that schism, a schism is such a bad thing in the Sangha that you don't want to wait to the next full moon or next new moon day. You want to heal that straight away when everybody has come to their senses and has decided to end that schism. So you can have an Opposita, a so-called harmony Opposita, on any day if you want to heal a schism. So this was the ending of the schism at Kosambi. Finally, everybody reconciled. So very happy end here. And just to recap how this was done, as we have seen, the Buddha has tried many, many different methods to get the monks to see reason and to overcome their quarrels, but the monks weren't ready yet. And so the Buddha left the area And it wasn't actually the Buddha himself who forced the monks to come to their senses. It was the lay people who stopped feeding them. And I think this is also a very valuable lesson for people who are trying to help mediate conflicts or trying to resolve conflicts. Sometimes we just have to conclude that we don't have the power to do that, just as even the Buddha didn't have the power to do that here. And sometimes we just have to find allies. Maybe there are other people there who have a different kind of leverage, who have different kind of influence on the situation, different kind of power. Just as in this case, it was the lay people who could stop feeding the monks. And then obviously when you don't get food for a few days, there is a certain sense of urgency and you feel that your life is threatened. And then you can let go of all these petty quarrels about bathrooms and toilets and cleaning and things when you feel that your life is in danger. And you see again what is important actually, and you get perspective again. And obviously that was something that only the lay people could do, that the Buddha couldn't do. So sometimes if we are involved in a conflict and we try to mediate, if we are unable to do it ourselves, maybe there are allies there that have similar interests to us, and maybe they have some influence on the situation, and maybe we can make use of that to get other people to have positive influences on the situation. Maybe we don't have to do everything ourselves if we try to resolve a conflict. And then another thing that we saw today is that the Buddha told everybody to, when it comes to material things, to support everybody equally, like all the parties in the conflict. Nobody should be threatened or with basic necessities of life, basic requisites, food and other things. So when they all came to Savatthi, the Buddha taught everybody to share that equally. He told the lay people and also the monastics to make sure that everybody has equal access to the basic necessities of life. But when it comes to Dhamma teachings, then you have to discriminate. Then you can only listen to people who speak in accordance with the Dhamma. And when you want to create, and if people have seen reason, and if they want to reconcile, then really what we should do is help them, and we shouldn't punish them. In the same way that the Buddha said, well, to that monk who saw that he had committed the offense, the Buddha didn't give him any specific punishment for having created this massive big schism. He just said, well, now you've seen that you made a mistake, you have admitted your mistake, so let's just readmit you to the sangha, and let's just, continue on with our lives. So once you've seen the mistake, or once one of the parties in the conflict has seen their mistake, it's no longer necessary to punish them. Just make it easy for them to come back into the group and to overcome that conflict. And then in the very end, what we have seen when the two parties wanted to come together again, the Buddha created a very beautiful little ceremony for everybody to come together. And the Buddha said, everybody must come. Even if you're sick, you still have to come. And just everybody come together, and everybody just agree that they want to create this unity and this harmony in the Sangha and overcome this schism. And then recite Patimokkha together. So make a common affirmation to the same rules, a common affirmation to the same training and to the monastic path, and obviously also to the aspiration to attain higher stages on the path, to develop the path to attain Nibbana. So let just everybody come together again and have a positive experience together. After all this fighting and after everybody being just so angry with each other, let everybody come together and have like this positive, harmonious meeting and create a good atmosphere among everybody. It's very important that when the conflict ends, that we don't just ignore it and says, well, yeah, everybody has agreed to end the conflict, so let's just everybody go our own way. But to actually bring people together and have a positive experience together, to start, the future relationship on a good footing and on a positive note. So I think that was very, very skillful what the Buddha did here. And I think this is also something that we can hopefully incorporate into our own strategies if we are trying to resolve conflict. And if we are trying to get people who were quarreling before to start fresh and to start on a positive note in a positive atmosphere again. So that was the end of the story at Kosambi, of that schism. we see there's a happy ending and the monks reconcile. And hopefully you found that interesting. I thought there were so many beautiful teachings in that schism at Kosambi, and so many skillful ways of resolving conflicts that can be applicable not only to the monks in Kosambi, but also to any kind of conflicts that we might encounter in our daily life. So I hope that you enjoyed looking into the schism at Kosambi in quite a bit of detail. And if you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the live chat, and I will see if I can answer them. So here's a question from Geeta, and she says, Ayya, in your life experience, have you ever witnessed such a schism similar to this in the Mahasangha? So luckily, I have never witnessed a schism to that extent. So I have witnessed a lot of people quarreling about a lot of small issues, and these issues can get out of hand, and people can get quite upset about the smallest, tiniest things. So that, I think, is very common in all kinds of groups when people are living together, whether that is in families or in sanghas or in other intentional communities, or even at workplaces or in groups of friends. I think it can be that the tiniest things can trigger quite strong emotional reactions. So that I have witnessed, but luckily I've never witnessed anything actually developing into a schism. So schisms are really, really rare. The schisms that happened in the Buddha's time. So in the Buddha's time, there were two schisms, the one at Kosambi and the one with Devadatta. And both of those two schisms were quite different. In the Kosambi case, the two groups of monks were actually good monks. All of them had good intentions. They were just a little bit delusional and under the sway of defilements, and let things get out of hand. But generally, they were interested in practicing the Dhamma. Whereas in Devadatta's case, Devadatta actually had malicious intent, and he actually deliberately split the Sangha. So that is quite a different game. And that is quite like a strong, unwholesome action. So those are two very different kinds of schisms. But both of those schisms were healed in the end. In both cases, the Sangha was unified again. So schisms are really, really rare. And because most monastics are aware of, the grave karma that you create if you cause a schism, it very rarely, evolves into such a big conflict. If people are really, really unhappy, they just tend to go somewhere else. So if you really can't get along with a person in one place, you might just try to go to another monastery, or go to a different place, or go on retreat, or just try to avoid that person or something. But actually creating a schism, I have never seen that. And Gita also says, in the current times, is there not disagreement about the bhikkhuni's ordination in certain Buddhist countries? Well, I guess there is some kind of disagreement, although I think sort of dying down now, because bhikkhunis, there are just so many bhikkhunis now. So I think this kind of issue is these kind of discussions are kind of outdated already. But there is a difference between just a disagreement and a full-blown schism. So people can disagree on all kinds of things, but as long as they practice, as long as they recite Patimokkha together, and as long as they sort of generally live together and so on, this is not a schism, it's just a disagreement. So disagreements are there on all kinds of issues, not only on bhikkhunis, but just so many different issues regarding Vinaya, and regarding teachings, and regarding many, many, many different issues. So yeah, I guess, there are plenty of people who have different opinions on plenty of things, but doesn't mean that that is actually a schism. And Anagarkasunya says, it is curious that the Buddha says not to withhold food when it is that which brought the monks to reunification. How should we understand this? So I think obviously when they were in Kosambi and still quarreling, then it was very skillful to withhold the food. But you can't do that indefinitely, because at some point people would just die. So you don't want people to actually die or to actually be in like serious physical danger. So to make the monks fast for a few days, because the lay people don't feed them at Kosambi, just to the point where they are hungry enough to actually have a clearer mind and understand that they're fighting literally over cleaning the bathroom, which is totally ridiculous. And so that they, regain their senses and decide that they want to reconcile, that's one thing. But then the monks have to wander from Kosambi to Savatthi, and that takes quite a while. That takes several weeks probably. And then even when they're at Savatthi, probably it still takes quite a while for everybody to arrive and to gather and to see the Buddha and to discuss all these things. So it's not that they just walk in and reconcile the next moment. This probably would still have taken maybe a few days, maybe a few weeks. So at that point, it would have been quite a few weeks already, maybe a month or even 2 months since the lay people stopped feeding them at Kosambi. So at that point, probably, if they don't get any food for this whole time, it would be very, very difficult. Maybe the young and strong monks, they can do that, but you have to remember, in a sangha there will always be elderly people, there will always be sick people, they might be novices and children that are quite young. So you have to think about these people, and so for that reason you can't withhold food forever. And if people have already come to the senses and have already seen that they want to reconcile, then obviously there's no more point in punishing them further. So as we have seen, the Buddha doesn't just punish the monks. Once they have seen that they have made a mistake and asked for to be readmitted into the sangha or ask the Buddha for help to reconcile, then he doesn't add additional punishment. So I think it's just to make sure that nobody gets into actual physical danger. So it was skillful to do that for a short time, but it's not actually skillful to do that long term. So Charles Lee asks, what might the Buddha or Buddhism say regarding the actions of the women in the Greek play Lysistrata, who withhold sex from their husband as a means of forcing the men to negotiate peace? I think that is a very skillful means. It's very similar to, I think, what the lay people did here, withholding food. So withholding something that the other party really, really wants. So I'm not too familiar with that play, that Greek play, but it does sound like something that's very similar to what the lay people did here with withholding the food. And a skillful means, if you use it for a good end, so use it to end a conflict, or in this case here, to negotiate a peace. I think, like, I don't really know that play too much, but from what you describe here, it sounds like skillful means. And Buddha Ruchi says, in my Mahayana Buddhist experience, someone else, me, would have secretly cleaned the toilet, and that would have been the end of it. Maybe, but if people really want to quarrel, that they will find another trigger that lets them quarrel. So yeah, if people are dead set on quarreling, then you can clean the toilet as much as you like. They will just start fighting about something else. And Edward says, thank you, Ayya. I enjoyed the series. I've been through many conflicts at my job, and most people do leave. Yeah. Sometimes that is the best thing you can do. If you cannot resolve the conflict, at least you can protect yourself. And we have seen even the Buddha left. Temporarily, of course. So after the monks came to him and asked for his advice to reconcile, then he was more than willing to help. But for the time being, while he couldn't do anything, he also left. So sometimes that can be a good option. And we have so many comments and questions. We have to go a bit faster. Buddha Ruchi says, also at times I take the blame when I'm in fact blameless. Is this against precepts? It is, after all, a lie. Well, if you lie outright, then obviously that's not a good idea. Also, it can encourage the people who, like, it really depends on the situation. Like, I don't know the situation now, but it could encourage people to just keep on doing very unskillful acts because you're taking the blame, and so they are not getting it, like they're not seeing any consequences, or they're not getting any feedback. And sometimes people unconsciously do all kinds of unskillful things, and they don't really know what they're doing, but because somebody else is taking the blame and they never get any feedback, they never change. So of course, I don't know your situation. I don't know to what extent this is going on, and if this is really burdening you, or if this happened once or whatever. But sometimes people can feel like they're doormats, and that other people are taking advantage of them, and that other people are abusing them. And they're always taking the blame for other people's behavior. So that can also be unskillful. And sometimes, of course, I don't know your situation, but sometimes this can also be because we ourselves are trying to avoid the conflict. We are scared of speaking up. So we just take the blame and shut up. And sometimes it might be better if we stood up for ourselves. But really, it really depends on your situation. So I can't really comment on that. And then Charles Lee also asked, can schism sometimes be a necessary condition for growth and modernization of Buddhism, where there is irreconcilable differences among Sangha with earnestly held beliefs? So I think discussion and debate can be a necessary condition for growth and modernization of Buddhism. And those debates can be very lively, and they can be very heated, and people can cling to various views. And sometimes people have good arguments for different kinds of views. And again, just similar to the case in Kosambi, everybody has good intentions. And still the debates can get quite heated. But I don't think it has to get to the point where there is an actual schism. Because as I mentioned, it's very easy to avoid a schism. If you don't want to have a schism, just go somewhere else. So if you want to discuss and debate with somebody, you don't have to be in the same monastery, especially nowadays where people discuss and debate, but they just meet somewhere and debate, or they debate on the internet, or they debate on email, or people just give different talks in different places. So you don't have to let it come to the point of it actually being a schism. So as I mentioned, a schism is people within the same territory reciting Patimokkha in two different groups. So that is defined as a schism in the Sangha. But if you reside in two different areas, let's say two different monasteries, and you're just discussing and debating about various issues, that is not a schism. And also, if somebody from the other monastery happens to be at your place on a moon day, they can still join your Patimokkha recitation. It's not a big deal. So you don't have to make, like, if you disagree, that's fine. If you want to debate, and obviously that contributes to the modernization of Buddhism, that's all fine. But you don't have to take it to the extent that you exclude other people from your Patimokkha recitation. You don't actually have to create a schism just to have a debate about, various issues in the Sangha. So I don't think you need to have a schism. And Sud asks, I don't understand how someone can be a sutta expert and fight about toilet cleaning. How can someone be a Vinaya expert or a sutta expert without any wisdom? Well, you can collect a lot of theoretical knowledge and not put it into practice. So I think we have plenty of people nowadays, whether they're actually practitioners or not, who know a lot about the suttas and know a lot about the Vinaya and haven't actually practiced that much. I mean, just look at, let's say, just for example, let's say there are a lot of university professors who have studied the Pali canon. Maybe they're Indologists, or even like Buddhist studies professors, but they don't actually practice themselves. So they will have a lot of knowledge, but they haven't necessarily developed wisdom. So that's entirely different. So I feel like, people are just people, and not everybody who is in monastic robes necessarily has made all that much progress on the path. It just means people who join the sangha just means that they are inspired. They want to dedicate their life to the practice of the Buddha's path. But not everybody has the karmic conditions to actually make that much progress. So some people, even after 30, 40, 50 years in robes, still have quite a few defilements and still can be difficult people to live with. And they can still have quite a bit of ego. So if you are a very highly respected teacher and you have a lot of students, and someone else comes and points out a mistake that you've made, if you have quite a strong ego, you will be quite upset. And I think that's what we saw happening here. Two teachers with not that much wisdom, both of them very stubbornly clinging to their views. And because they were teachers and because both of them had such a large following, and all the students took sides with their teachers, the thing got kind of out of hand. And Charles Lee has one more question. What do you see as some examples of unskillful boycott and some modern examples of skillful boycott? Well, I don't know. I think the question is quite broad and quite open. So I'm not quite sure what area exactly you're referring to. I mean, if people are doing something that is clearly against the precepts, then I think it's wise for Buddhists not to get involved in that. For example, you could call it a boycott if people don't buy meat because they don't want to support the quite brutal way that animals are treated in modern societies, the quite brutal way that they are slaughtered, and even that they are raised and that they're kept. And so people who are going vegetarian, people who are going vegan, people who are boycotting that kind of industry, who are not buying animal products, meat and milk and dairy and eggs and stuff, maybe you could call that a boycott. And I think that would be in line with compassion, and it would also be in line with wisdom and trying to avoid causing harm to other beings. So that, I think, would be quite skillful. But that I think might be one example of a skillful boycott. It really depends on the country and it depends on the situation. And I think many things might be different in Western countries than they would be in Asia, or they would be different even in America than they would be in Europe. So it's hard to say, like it's hard to give a blanket answer here. And then Buddha Ruchi says, no burden and seldom. Thank you for your answers. So I guess it's no burden when you take the blame for someone else. So that's good. So as long as you don't feel that's overwhelming or anything, then maybe you've made good karma by trying to contribute something wholesome to a very difficult situation. Okay, and that was the last question for today. And we've also gone over time quite a bit. So thank you for sticking around for so long. And we will end for today with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join in if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And I'll see you all next week. Have a good week.